Tammy Lynn Leppert was a promising young actress and model, best known for a small but very memorable role in one of the most iconic scenes in Scarface. Born on February 5th, 1965, in Rockledge, Florida, Tammy began her journey into the limelight at the age of 4, participating in beauty pageants. As she transitioned into her teenage years, Tammy expanded her horizons into modeling and acting. She graced the cover of CoverGirl magazine in October 1978 and landed minor roles in films such as Little Darlings in 1980 and Spring Break in 1983. Her most notable appearance was in the 1983 classic Scarface, where she played the girl who distracts the lookout during the infamous chainsaw scene. However, in early 1983, those close to Tammy noticed a stark change in her behavior. After attending a weekend party following the Spring Break shoot, she returned home noticeably different. Her close friend, Wing Flanagan, observed that she came back a different person. This shift became more evident during the filming of Scarface, where she abruptly left after the fourth day. Her mother, Linda Curtis, believed Tammy was overtaken by a delusion that someone intended to harm her. Concerned, Linda had Tammy undergo a 72-hour observation at a medical center, but doctors reportedly found no signs of any mental health concerns or of substance use. On July 6, 1983, Tammy left her home in Rockledge, Florida, with a male friend, informing her mother that she was heading to the beach and would return shortly. Her friend later told authorities that they had an argument while driving, leading him to leave her in a parking lot near the Glass Bank in Cocoa Beach. Despite being the last known person to see her, he wasn't considered a suspect, though Tammy's mother maintained that he ought to have been. In the aftermath of her disappearance, investigators explored various leads. One theory involved Christopher Wilder, an Australian-born serial perpetrator linked to the slayings of several women across the United States. Wilder's modus operandi included luring women with promises of modeling opportunities, which aligned with Tammy's background. Tammy's family even filed a lawsuit against Wilder, but it was eventually dropped due to doubts about his involvement. Moreover, Wilder's known spree began a year after Tammy vanished, making his connection to her case tenuous. Another potential suspect was John Brennan Crutchley, infamously known as the Vampire. Crutchley was convicted of kidnapping a woman in Orlando, Florida, during which he drained and consumed her life essence. While he was considered a possible suspect in Tammy's case, authorities found no concrete evidence linking him to her disappearance. Crutchley had the good sense to take out the trash while serving life in prison in 2002. Linda Curtis had her own theory, believing that Tammy was abducted and slain due to her knowledge of a large-scale criminal operation in Brevard County, Florida. According to Linda, this operation involved many prominent local citizens, and Tammy's paranoia stemmed from her awareness of these illicit activities. However, investigators found no records to support this claim and didn't endorse this theory. Others have speculated that Tammy witnessed something horrific at a Hollywood party, which caused her to have a mental break. Under this theory, this mental break and her subsequent behavior made her a liability to powerful people, and they had her eliminated. In 1985, 2 years after Tammy's disappearance, Cocoa Beach detective Harold Lewis received 2 anonymous phone calls from a woman claiming that Tammy was alive. The caller also mentioned that Tammy was pursuing her dream of becoming a nurse. Despite these calls, no further evidence surfaced to confirm Tammy's whereabouts, and there's nothing to indicate that these calls were based in reality. Personally, I don't put too much stock in this call because there's always been deranged people out there who like to try to insert themselves into high-profile cases. The slaying of Trudy Espes in August 1996 remains one of Norway's most haunting unsolved crimes. Also, apologies in advance to any of my Norwegian listeners because, yes, I'm going to absolutely mess up some pronunciations here. Trudy was only 20 years old when she met her tragic fate in Geiranger, a picturesque fjord village known for its serene landscapes. Trudy grew up in Orskog, Norway, and was known as a kind, introspective young woman with a bright future ahead of her. She had been working a seasonal position at the Hotel Union in Geiranger, a village that attracts tourists from all over the world due to its UNESCO-listed fjord and stunning scenery. Like many young adults seeking adventure and independence, Trudy looked forward to this job as an opportunity to experience life in a new place. Despite her excitement about her summer role, Trudy had expressed concerns about her safety. In her personal diary, she reportedly detailed encounters with men whose behavior made her uncomfortable. These revelations, discovered after her death, would later shape parts of the investigation. On August 8, 1996, Trudy was seen sitting on a rock near a popular walking path overlooking the fjord. This location was easily accessible, frequently visited by tourists, and seemingly safe. She was engrossed in a book, enjoying the warm summer afternoon. Witnesses recalled seeing her between 4:30 and 5 p.m., relaxed and unbothered. However, by 6 p.m., just over an hour later, things had clearly changed. A Swedish couple who had passed by earlier returned to the same area and noticed Trudy was no longer there. The husband claimed to have briefly explored the wooded area and heard a single scream. Though unsettling, he dismissed it at the time, believing it could have been children playing. He also reported seeing a peculiar man, described as having a quote-unquote childlike stature. This sighting became one of the few concrete leads in the case. When Trudy didn't return to her accommodation that evening, concern grew quickly. Friends and colleagues reported her missing, and the police launched an extremely extensive search. 11 days after she disappeared, on August 19th, Trudy's body was discovered in a wooded area not far from where she had been last seen. Her remains were found concealed under heavy rocks and thick vegetation. This grim discovery confirmed the worst fears of her family and the local community. Trudy had been slain. An autopsy revealed that she had been violated before she had been slain, with the perpetrator having left behind evidence that may be used to capture him at some point. This tragic revelation turned the investigation into a high-stakes hunt for a perpetrator who seemed to have vanished without a trace. The slaying prompted one of the largest police investigations in Norwegian history. Authorities worked tirelessly to document every person present in Geiranger on the day of her disappearance. This was no easy task, as the area was a hub for international tourists. Hotel guest lists, campsite registrations, and ferry passenger manifests were scrutinized. Credit card transactions and vehicle registrations were also examined in an attempt to identify potential suspects. Over 3,000 individuals from nearly 40 countries were interviewed. Witness testimonies painted a fragmented picture of the events leading up to Trudy's disappearance. Multiple witnesses reported seeing a suspicious man loitering near the path where Trudy had been reading. He was described as being of average height, with a slim build, and speaking German. His clothing, a blue and white striped shirt, was noted by several witnesses. It's unclear whether this man was the same suspicious man seen by the Swedish couple. Adding to the mystery, investigators discovered an entry in Trudy's diary that read, German crutches. While it's unclear whether this referred to the man seen near the crime scene, it became an important lead. Some theorized that the perpetrator might have faked an injury to gain Trudy's trust. The image of a German-speaking man on crutches near the scene became a central focus of the investigation. Photographs taken by tourists on the day of the slaying were analyzed years later using advanced technology. In one image, a man fitting this description was seen standing near the Geiranger ferry dock. And yeah, this is one of those times I'm going to have all the people who just listen take a look at the screen if you're able. Some people say that the man in this picture actually has two intact legs, despite his appearance, suggesting that he's rigged himself up to appear disabled. I'd be interested to hear what you think in the comments, since honestly I can't really tell one way or the other with complete certainty. In spite of his distinct appearance, no one has ever been able to identify the man, and he's never come forward to the police. Several other individuals were also scrutinized over the years. One theory posited that the perpetrator could have been a local, given the knowledge required to conceal the body so effectively. However, personally, while I've read this theory, I have my doubts. I'm not sure just how effectively her body was concealed, given that she was found in less than 2 weeks. Trudy's case has faced several significant obstacles from the get-go. First, the remote location of Geranger meant resources were limited. Despite this, investigators had to coordinate efforts across a wide geographical area and with international law enforcement. Second, forensic science in the 1990s lacked the capabilities we have today. Although Trudy's body was examined thoroughly, DNA evidence wasn't processed with the sophistication available now. It's unclear to me if any DNA has been submitted for forensic genealogical testing, especially since almost all the sources for this case are in Norwegian or German. Finally, the transient nature of the town's population created a logistical nightmare. Many potential witnesses left Geranger before police could interview them, and some were never located. Efforts to track down these individuals decades later have proven difficult. It's possible that the perpetrator deliberately picked this location to commit his heinous act for this exact reason. Over the years, Trudy's case has been reopened multiple times, reflecting the determination of authorities to find answers. Personally, I have a lot of hope that this one will be solved in the fairly near future. Forensic genealogy is rapidly closing out major cases that people thought might remain cold forever. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to share this video with your friends and family. If each of you watching would share this video with 2 people, that would allow me to spend significantly more time working on content creation. On December 27, 2022, Sierra Chapman from Trotwood, Ohio, disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Despite extensive investigations, her whereabouts are still unknown. At the time of her disappearance, she was living with her sister on Cambridge Avenue in Dayton, Ohio, and was a mother to her teenage son. On December 27, 2022, around 4:30 a.m., Sierra was captured on surveillance footage leaving her ex-boyfriend's apartment complex on Autumn Woods Drive in Trotwood. She had gone there to exchange personal items following their recent breakup. The footage shows her getting into her silver 2014 Cadillac SUV and driving away. This was the last confirmed sighting of her. 2 days later, on December 29th, Sierra's sister reported her missing after unsuccessful attempts to contact her. The situation became more concerning when, on January 6, 2023, her SUV was found abandoned on Jewel Avenue in Middletown, Ohio, approximately 20 miles from Trotwood. Inside the vehicle were her purse and other personal belongings, but there was no sign of Sierra. According to her family, she had no known connections to Middletown, making the location of her vehicle particularly puzzling. The Dayton Police Department, in collaboration with the FBI, has been actively investigating Sierra's disappearance. Given the circumstances, authorities have labeled her case as suspicious, and the statements released are extremely telling. Major Brian Johns of the Dayton Police Department stated, "She didn't go missing by accident. This was a very well-planned out, well-orchestrated incident, and people know." This indicates that investigators believe there are individuals with considerable knowledge about the events leading to her disappearance. In the months following her disappearance, multiple searches were conducted, including large-scale efforts involving volunteers, drones, ATVs, and canine units. Despite these extensive efforts, no significant leads were uncovered. Sierra's family has been vocal in their appeals for information, emphasizing that her disappearance is out of character, especially given her close relationship with her son. The FBI has offered a $10,000 reward for any information leading to the capture of the person or people responsible for her disappearance. The family has expressed hope that the reward offered might encourage someone to come forward with crucial information. Given the statements made by the authorities in this case, I suspect they have a strong suspicion as to who's responsible for Sierra's disappearance. Unfortunately, her case hasn't gotten the attention it deserves thus far, so I feel like there's a non-zero chance someone watching right now may hold the key to closing Sierra's case. The Tagan incident, also known as the Teikoku Bank incident, took place on January 26, 1948, in Tokyo. This horrific incident, which involved an individual posing as a government official and poisoning 16 people, shocked and appalled Japan and the world. To fully understand why the Tagan incident captured so much attention, it helps to know a bit about the backdrop against which it happened. Japan in 1948 was still grappling with the devastation of World War II. The country's infrastructure lay in ruins, the economy was fragile, and the general population was struggling with shortages of basic necessities. Many people had lost faith in traditional institutions and were often suspicious of one another. Japan experienced significant rising crime rates that occurred in the turbulent environment right after the war ended. These criminals were the woodpeckers of mistrust that unrelentingly pecked apart the branches of social cohesion. On top of the social and economic troubles, the US-led occupation authorities were reorganizing government structures, including the police force. Legal institutions were undergoing reforms intended to reshape Japan into a democratic state. While these reforms had many positive goals, they also meant that the investigative methods and judicial processes used in the past were being questioned and, in some cases, rapidly replaced. It was in this uncertain setting that the Tagan incident occurred. The Tagan incident refers to the Teikoku Bank, which had several branches throughout Tokyo. On January 26, 1948, a man who claimed to be a public health official entered the Shinamachi branch of Teikoku Bank in the Toshima ward of Tokyo. This man said he was there on urgent government business, explaining that an outbreak of dysentery was raging in the area. He warned the staff and a few customers who were present that they needed immediate inoculation or medication to prevent the disease. Because infectious diseases were still a genuine worry in post-war Japan, no one at the bank appears to have questioned his instructions. The man gave them a liquid, which he said was medicine they had to drink on the spot. Moments after consuming the beverage, most of those who drank it collapsed. 12 of them died from what turned out to be poison. 4 ultimately survived, but were left unconscious for a time and suffered from long-term impacts from the poisoning. The perpetrator fled with a fairly modest sum of money considering the carnage inflicted. Reports vary, but it was somewhere in the range of the equivalent of 2,000 American dollars at the time. In the immediate wake of the slayings, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department launched a major investigation. They questioned numerous witnesses, including the 4 survivors who'd been rendered unconscious, but eventually recovered enough to describe what happened. However, the perpetrator had left behind little physical evidence, and no one remembered small details, like the official's face or clothing, well enough to provide a clear description. Because Japan was in a state of flux, with shortages affecting everything from food to office supplies, the police didn't have the resources they would have had prior to the war. It's hard to imagine an investigation like this being done on a shoestring budget, but that's what happened. The police gathered empty vials from the bank, which later turned out to contain poison as expected, but you'll notice I'm not saying which kind. Keep this in mind. Police also collected statements from the survivors who insisted they had believed the perpetrator was an official from the Ministry of Health. According to these survivors, he used official-sounding terminology that convinced the bank's employees they were facing an urgent public health crisis. In addition to the difficulty of identifying the suspect, the investigators were racing against time. Public pressure to solve the case was enormous, and the government itself was under scrutiny because the perp had used a fake public health ruse. People wanted answers. Who would commit such a horrendous crime, and how could the authorities let him slip away? Also, since public health outbreaks were a very serious issue in immediate post-war Japan, apprehending the perp was necessary to restore public order. Imagine you're a Japanese citizen approached by a legitimate public health official in the days and weeks following this incident, while the perpetrator was still on the loose. Would you willingly subject yourself to any form of treatment from this official? I have to think that most of you may think, nah, I'll roll the dice on this one, which of course would lead to even more deadly public health outbreaks of diseases like dysentery. Political pressure from both inside Japan and from the American occupation forces was immense. Several months passed before the police zeroed in on a suspect named Sadamichi Hirasawa. He was an artist known for his paintings who supposedly had some eccentric habits and wasn't exactly trusted by his neighbors. Police said they found circumstantial evidence linking him to the crime, including the possibility that he'd once posed as a government official for some other more conventional scam. More controversially, investigators claimed that Hirasawa provided a confession. However, there'd later be accusations that this confession was coerced or otherwise unreliable, partly because of harsh interrogation techniques used at the time. And if you're familiar with the Japanese authorities' investigative techniques, let's just say Persona 5's frame story isn't too far from the truth. Hirasawa was eventually indicted and went to trial. The prosecution argued that he was motivated by financial gain and that the method he used, poisoning, was an attempt to make sure there would be no witnesses. The defense countered by questioning the credibility of the police investigation and emphasizing the lack of direct evidence. However, for reasons which we'll discuss shortly, his defense counsel appears to have pulled a lot of punches. Which, hey, when your client is accused of one of the most heinous acts imaginable, maybe don't do that. Nevertheless, the court found him guilty in 1950, and he was sentenced to death. From the outset, Hirasawa's conviction was controversial, both within Japan and around the world, due to the high-profile nature of the case. Critics pointed out that no one could recall his face clearly, and there was no physical evidence conclusively tying him to the crime scene. No fingerprints, no unique items left behind. Additionally, the poison used in the incident was said to be a combination of cyanide compounds, but the exact makeup was not clearly documented in the initial investigations. That gap in the records led some to question whether the police had thoroughly tested or analyzed the substance. And yes, you heard that correctly, the police gathered evidence from the vials, but apparently didn't have the resources to properly test what the substance was. At the trial, the prosecution claimed that Hirasawa used potassium cyanide, which they claimed was readily available at the time. However, the Japanese government's own investigation questioned this, stating that it was probably acetone cyanohydrin. Notably, this compound would have only been available to people with access to decommissioned Japanese military equipment. There were also allegations that certain investigative procedures were bungled or rushed. For instance, some surviving witnesses later mentioned that their initial statements about the suspect's appearance were either not recorded accurately or dismissed by the police. Then there's the claim that Hirasawa's confession was extracted under duress or was actually fabricated. After the war, Japanese law enforcement agencies were sometimes accused of using severe interrogation tactics. Notably, many of these police officers had served similar roles in the notoriously brutal Japanese Imperial Army. Despite all these controversies, the courts continued to uphold Hirasawa's guilt. Appeals were made over the decades, and numerous supporters, including legal experts, writers, and activists, campaigned for a retrial. They argued that the entire case was built on questionable or circumstantial evidence, yet the justice system never granted a formal retrial. One of the strangest aspects of this case is that while Hirasawa was officially sentenced to be eliminated, he was never executed. He spent the rest of his life in prison, where he continued to protest his innocence and insist on a new trial. From the early 1950s until his death in 1987, he remained on death row, making him one of the longest-serving death row inmates in the history of Japan. Some have suggested that Japan's government might have had private doubts about his guilt, which could explain why he was never executed. Others think it was more a matter of bureaucratic delays and the intricacy of the appeals process. Regardless of the reason, Hirasawa remained behind bars until he died of natural causes at the age of 95. Over time, various theories have emerged about who might have committed the Tagan incident, if not Hirasawa. One popular idea connects the poisoner to the Japanese military's infamous Unit 731, which had been involved in chemical and biological experimentation during the war. And yeah, fair warning, you may not want to Google that one. Seriously. According to this theory, someone trained in chemical warfare might have used knowledge gained from wartime experiments to create the poison. However, there's no conclusive evidence to back this up, and critics argue that it's just a rumor that feeds off Japan's post-war anxieties. Another theory speculates the real culprit was an imposter who'd already pulled off a few smaller cons by impersonating government officials. Some doubt has also been cast on whether the motive was truly robbery. The amount stolen wasn't huge, and the perpetrator's approach seemed unusually sophisticated for a straightforward theft. That's prompted speculation that the culprit might have been pursuing some personal vendetta against one of the people in the bank. To cover up the true nature of the crime, under this theory, the perpetrator simply poisoned everyone and robbed the bank to cover it all up. And I'm not quite sure why, but this seems so much more evil than the theory that he was just robbing a bank, even if the results are the exact same. Notably, the statute of limitations passed on the crime in the 1980s, and if the true perpetrator was in his 20s, it's theoretically possible that he's still alive. According to the Gospel of John, the seamless robe was a garment worn by Jesus during his crucifixion. The soldiers, recognizing its seamless construction was unnatural in a good way, chose not to divide it but cast lots to determine its owner. Over the millennia, various traditions have claimed possession of this relic, each with its own historical narrative and degree of authenticity. One of the most prominent claims originates from Trier, Germany. Legend suggests that Helena, mother of Emperor Constantine the Great, discovered the seamless robe during her pilgrimage to the Holy Land in the 4th century. She is believed to have sent the robe to Trier, where Constantine had previously resided. The first documented reference to the robe in Trier dates back to 1196, when Archbishop Johann I consecrated an altar containing the relic. Over time, sections of silk were added to the robe, and in the 19th century, it was treated with a rubber solution in an attempt to preserve it. These modifications have rendered the original fabric unsuitable for carbon dating, leaving its authenticity uncertain. The robe is typically kept folded in a reliquary and is rarely displayed. In 1512, during an imperial diet, Emperor Maximilian I requested to see the Holy Robe, leading to its public exhibition. This event initiated a tradition of pilgrimages, with the relic being displayed at irregular intervals, the most recent being in 2012. The periods between displays can be long, with some lasting as long as 150 years. So if you're really into the idea of seeing this version of the seamless robe, you better book your pilgrimage flight as soon as the next showing's announced. Another popular, though more dubious claim to the seamless robe is found in France. According to this tradition, Empress Irene of Byzantium gifted the robe to Charlemagne around the year 800. Charlemagne then entrusted it to his daughter, Theodora, who was the abbess of a convent in Argenteuil. The earliest known document referencing the robe in Argenteuil dates to 1156, authored by Archbishop Hugh of Rouen, who described it as the garment of the child Jesus. Over time, records began to change, and a legend developed around the relic that it was the seamless robe, an even more sacred relic than mere baby clothing. During the French Revolution, the parish priest cut the robe into pieces to protect it from desecration, with many pieces being lost. Not to be left out, the Eastern Orthodox Church also holds various traditions concerning the whereabouts of the seamless robe. In Georgian lore, a Jewish rabbi named Elias, present at the crucifixion, purchased the robe from the Roman soldier who won the bet for it and then subsequently brought it to Georgia. A portion of this garment is said to have been taken to Russia sometime in the 17th century. While historians and theologians remain skeptical of all claims to the seamless robe, the strongest relative claim appears to be that of the German robe. That said, like with all claims of religious artifacts, especially those directly associated with major league religious figures like Jesus, it may always be best to err on the side of caution.